as you know, the Patients First Act, Bill 41, was introduced last week in Ontario. Many doctors are not happy with it. The Ontario Medical Association has spoken out against it, and in fact, doctors are now resigning from some of the committees that are responsible for bringing the Patients First Act into effect. Doctors are stepping down from local health integration networks and from other organizations that provide healthcare or play a role in the healthcare system in Ontario. Why are they so upset about the Patients First Act? We're joined by Dr. Sohail Gandhi, who is an Ontario family physician in Stayner, Ontario, and also on the executive of the family practice section of the Ontario Medical Association. Good morning.
Hello, how are you, Mark?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
What's wrong, in your view, with the Patients First Act?
It's actually a little bit more complex than that. I think what's wrong right now is the relationship between physicians and the current government. The reason physicians have unfortunately resorted to taking this kind of job action of resigning from all these committees is that over the past couple of years, it's become apparent that by attending these committees, a lot of the feedback that physicians gave and a lot of the information and input and constructive criticism that physicians were giving to how the healthcare system was structured was completely ignored. And it became obvious to all of us that the government had a plan and they did not wish to deviate from the plan, and they really didn't want the input of frontline physicians. And so the recommendation from the Ontario Medical Association has been, they don't really want your opinion anyway. Don't bother wasting your time going to these meetings. Go to your office where you can do some good, see your patients, help them improve their lives as best you can. If it's an evening meeting, spend time with your family instead. But your opinions aren't really being listened to. So just don't bother, and that's why we've taken this job action.
But we can talk more about the impact of that in a moment, but your issue is with the process and not with the act itself?
Mm-hmm. Just for the record, I was actually one of the physicians who, so my issue is with the act itself, but it's because the act came out of a bad process.
Right.
So for the record, I was one of the physicians who was at the table. I was the HealthLink's lead physician for my region for 2 years. So I actually went to a lot of these meetings, and I said, look, in our neck of the woods, this is what our patients need. In our neck of the woods, this is how to improve care. I talked to all my family practice colleagues, and I took all of this information to these meetings. So it's not, I'm not someone who's just screaming from the sidelines. I actually was at these meetings. And what I discovered was that the Patients First Act, which the Minister of Health announced, I think in December, his plans in December of 2016, so about a year ago, he'd already had implementation processes in place 2 months prior for this act. So even though he came on December to the physicians and said, hey, look, I want to talk to you, he'd already developed an implementation process that the LHINs had given him on October 8th of last year. So it became quite obvious that he didn't, all of this asking us to come to the table, it was just for show. He's got a plan. He wants to implement it. Our opinion is not valued to him, and that's fine. He's got that right. He's the Minister of Health. He was duly, elected to make that decision. But if he doesn't want my opinion, I'm not going to take time out of my office where I could be seeing patients who need my help to go to a meeting where, I'm going to be ignored anyway.
Right. But I think what the members of the public are hearing, and look, they respect doctors, they want their input to be part of the process in Ontario, and they're concerned whenever the government's at odds with doctors. But I think what patients want to know is this good policy or not? Is the Patients First Act really putting patients first? Is it going to result in improvements in healthcare?
So the short answer to that is no. If you look at the actual policy, it actually creates 78 additional bureaucratic subregions, and so it creates another 78 different areas in Ontario that all need a management structure, and that management structure is going to be paid for by Ontario taxpayers' dollars. And there's really nothing in the act itself that says we're going to actually provide more frontline care. We're going to provide more PSWs for patients who are sick or in need. There was actually a story from Ottawa Today. Dr. Paul Hacker talked about how palliative patients are not getting support when they wish to die at home from the CCACs, and that kind of stuff isn't addressed in the Act. The Act only talks about, well, the minister is going to direct this, and he's going to create 78 other bureaucracies, and somehow through creating more paper, life is supposed to get better. And quite frankly, no physician I've talked to is able to see that, other than Dr. Hoskins, of course.
Yeah. So what will be the impact of doctors leaving all of these committees and boards in Ontario? Because it means you won't be there providing the input anymore.
Well, we weren't providing input anyway, right? I mean, whenever we did, we were ignored. So the impact of us leaving on the committees is going to be from a functional point of view, from a what's going to get accomplished point of view, is going to be zero, because this exact same thing is going to happen that happened before. The only impact is now Dr. Hoskins won't be able to say, well, when this comes crashing down on him, as it will, he won't be able to say, but the doctors were at the table and they were here when I made these decisions, which is what he's been saying. And he won't be able to say that. And so that's the only impact.
And what would it take, do you think, for doctors to be back in line with the provincial government on some of these issues?
So one of the things that physicians have been asking for the past 2.5 years is an independent arbitrator. And the reason for that is that when you look at an agreement that physicians meet with a government, I mean, yes, there's a pay component, but the last two agreements with the government created a appropriate bilateral set of committees that dealt with the issues of the day. The most recent one in 2012 dealt with revisions to different areas of healthcare and how to restructure different committees. So there were these bilateral agreements that physicians had with the government on how to work together. Right now, we don't have a bilateral agreement, and unfortunately, the relationship is so poor that you're going to need some sort of third party involved to structure that bilateral agreement of what happens when you implement this act, who's responsible for what aspect of it, how does the committee structure work? Because right now, the act simply defines that it's up to the Minister of Health to direct care from Toronto. He's going to direct care throughout all parts of the province. And we need a set of structures in place to also look at appeals for when bad decisions are made. How do you appeal those decisions so they can be corrected?
Are things going to get worse before they get better? I mean, if we're in a situation where doctors and the government are at odds with each other over how to deliver health care in this province, is that going to affect patient care on some level? Is it going to affect the quality of the healthcare system?
So, unfortunately, it's already affected the quality of the health system. We've already been tracking a number of clinic closures that have occurred as a result of some of the unilateral decisions of Dr. Hoskins. Look, the people of Ontario pay a lot of money in taxes towards health care, and they deserve a system where physicians and government can work cooperatively together in their interest to provide good patient care. The current government has chosen not to pursue that route. They've chosen to make unilateral decisions. And history has taught us that whenever governments do that, unfortunately, you are going to get some abnormal and adverse effects to patient care, and we have seen that.
All right, Dr. Gandhi, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the call.
Dr. Sohail Gandhi is a family physician in Stayner, Ontario, also a member of the executive of the family practice section of the Ontario Medical Association.